I still remember the sound of the traffic that morning. It was cold and gray, and the streets of London were already full. People were rushing to work, holding coffee cups and phones, their faces tired and busy. I was one of them, walking fast, thinking about my next meeting. My name is Clara, and at that time, I was 29 years old. I worked in a tall glass building in the city, and I thought my life was everything I had dreamed of. I had worked hard to get there. My parents were proud of me, and my friends said I was lucky. I had a good salary, a small but pretty apartment, and a boyfriend who everyone said was perfect. His name was Daniel, and he worked in finance. We often met after work in the same cafe near the office. We talked about promotions, holidays, and sometimes about buying a flat together. It all sounded right, but somewhere deep inside, something always felt missing. That morning, I was standing at a crossing, waiting for the light to change, when I saw a young woman sitting on the ground. She was playing a guitar, singing softly, her voice calm and full of peace. She had no coat even though the air was cold. People walked past her without looking. I stopped for a second. I don't know why, but the sound of her voice stayed with me the whole day. In the meeting that followed, I could still hear it. The day was long, full of numbers, reports, and endless emails. When I got home that evening, I stood by the window and looked down at the city lights. I should have felt proud of what I had built, but instead, I felt tired. My phone was full of messages, but none of them made me happy. Daniel sent a text saying he would be late again. I ate dinner alone and told myself that this was just what adult life was like. But I couldn't stop thinking about that woman with the guitar. She looked free in a way I had never felt. A few weeks later, something happened that changed everything. Daniel and I were supposed to go on a short trip to Paris. I had been looking forward to it for weeks. On the morning of our flight, I got a message from him. He said something had come up at work, and he couldn't make it. He told me to go without him. I sat on my suitcase for a long time. I didn't even cry. I just felt empty. It was like my life had become a list of things I never really wanted. That evening, I walked through the city alone. The wind was sharp, and the lights felt cold. I passed the same corner where the guitar player had been before, but she wasn't there. I stood there for a while, thinking about her voice, and something inside me broke. I realized I didn't want this life anymore. I didn't want the meetings, the noise, or the endless race to be successful. I didn't even want the version of love that felt so empty. I wanted something real, something that would make me feel alive again. I didn't make a big decision that night. It started as a quiet thought, a whisper in my mind. I began reading travel blogs during my lunch breaks, stories of people who left everything to explore the world. I watched videos of mountains, oceans, and small villages where people lived simple lives. I imagined myself there, far from London, far from the noise. Each day the thought grew stronger. It became harder to ignore. One evening, I came home from work and looked around my apartment. The walls were white, the furniture clean and modern, but there was no warmth. Everything looked perfect, but it didn't feel like home. I opened my laptop and searched for volunteer programs abroad. I found one in northern India. It was a small school for children in the mountains. They needed English teachers. My heart started to race. It sounded impossible, but at the same time, it felt right. For the next few days, I couldn't think about anything else. During meetings, my mind drifted to the image of mountains and clear skies. One afternoon, I opened the application form. It was long, full of questions about experience and motivation. I filled it out without thinking. When I pressed send, I felt both fear and relief. For the first time in years, I felt alive. A week later, I got an email from the program coordinator. They had accepted my application. I would need to arrive in India in 2 months. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, my heart beating fast. I didn't know what to do first. I wanted to tell Daniel, but I also knew he wouldn't understand. For him, life was about plans and promotions. For me, it was no longer enough. That night, I told him everything. He listened quietly, and when I finished, he said it was a mistake. He said I was running away from reality. I nodded, but deep inside, I knew I was finally walking toward it. The weeks before leaving passed quickly. I sold most of my things and packed only what I needed. My friends thought I was crazy. My mother cried when I told her. She said I was throwing away my future. I tried to explain that I wanted to find meaning, but she didn't understand. Sometimes I didn't even understand it myself. I only knew that I couldn't keep living the same way. On the day of my flight, I arrived at the airport before sunrise. The city was still half asleep. I sat by the window, watching the planes move across the dark sky. My phone buzzed with messages, but I didn't read them. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to reply to anyone. I looked out at the horizon and felt calm. When the announcement came for boarding, I stood up and walked toward the gate. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt light. The flight was long. When we finally landed in Delhi, the air was warm and full of new smells and sounds. The city was alive in a way I had never seen before. I felt small, but strangely free. I took a train north the next morning, heading toward the mountains. Outside the window, the city slowly disappeared, replaced by green fields and hills. I watched everything in silence, trying to understand what I was doing. I didn't know if I was brave or foolish, but I knew there was no turning back now. When I reached the small town where the school was, it was late afternoon. The sun was low, and the mountains around me were golden. The school was simple, with white walls and wooden doors. Children were playing outside, their laughter filling the air. A woman came to greet me. She was kind, with warm eyes, and she said she was happy I had come. I smiled, though I was nervous. That night, I sat on the small bed in my new room, listening to the sounds of the village. I felt scared but peaceful at the same time. As I looked out of the window, I thought about my old life, the meetings, the late nights, the noise, and the endless search for more. Here, there was silence and air that smelled of trees and smoke. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what I would find here, but I knew the road that had brought me was already changing me. That night, before sleeping, I whispered to myself that this was not an escape. It was a beginning. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind moving through the trees. It was soft, quiet, and full of promise. I knew my life would never be the same again. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now let's continue. The first few days in the village felt like stepping into another world. Everything moved slowly. There were no tall buildings, no loud traffic, and no constant noise. The mornings began with the sound of roosters and children laughing. The air smelled of earth and wood smoke. People greeted each other with small smiles. I felt like I had entered a place that still remembered peace. At the small school, my main job was to help the children with English reading and writing. Most of them were between 6 and 12 years old. Their notebooks were old and torn, but they wrote carefully, with so much focus that it touched my heart. At first, I found it hard to speak slowly enough for them to understand, but soon I learned to listen more and to speak less. I realized that in London, I had always been in a hurry, even when I didn't need to be. Here, time felt softer, like it had space to breathe. Every evening I walked to the edge of the village. From there I could see the snow on the mountains in the distance. The light changed slowly, painting everything in gold before the night arrived. Sometimes I sat there for an hour, not thinking of anything. For years I had been chasing success and trying to prove my worth. Now I was sitting in silence, watching the sky change its color, and it felt more valuable than all the meetings and reports I had left behind. One evening, a little girl named Tara came to sit next to me. She was one of my students. She carried a small notebook in her hand and wanted me to help her with a poem she had written in English. It was about her mother, who had passed away when she was very young. Her writing was simple, full of small spelling mistakes, but every line was full of love. As I read her poem, I felt tears in my eyes. I realized that true beauty could live inside simple words. I told her that her poem was wonderful, and she smiled shyly. That night I thought about her words for a long time. The more I taught, the more I learned about myself. I began to see how much of my old life had been noise. I used to think that I needed to be important to be happy. I believed that I had to achieve more, buy more, and always move forward. But here, the days were filled with small tasks that had no reward except peace. Washing clothes in the river, cooking rice with the other teachers, or sitting around the fire at night taught me patience. I started to sleep better and to feel lighter. There was another teacher at the school named Mina. She was older than me, maybe in her 40s, and she had lived in the village all her life. She told me stories about her childhood and how the village had changed over the years. She spoke softly, but her words were strong. One night, while we were drinking tea near the fire, she said something that stayed with me. She said, "People who come here often think they are helping us, but most of the time, they are helping themselves." I didn't answer right away, but I knew she was right. I hadn't come here to save anyone. I had come to be saved from my own emptiness. As the weeks passed, I stopped checking my phone so often. The internet connection was weak, and at first, that made me anxious. But slowly, it became a kind of freedom. I no longer cared about news, posts, or updates. The world that had once seemed so important started to feel far away. I sent a few short messages to my parents, but I never opened the messages from Daniel. I didn't need to read them to know what they said. He would have told me to come back, to stop wasting my time. But I had no desire to go back. Sometimes I missed small things from my old life. I missed hot showers, soft beds, and clean clothes. But every time I missed them, I reminded myself that comfort had never made me happy. I was beginning to see how easy it was to live with less. The children laughed every day, even when they had no shoes or toys. Their joy was not built on things. It was built on connection. One night, after a long day of teaching, I sat outside my small room. The moon was bright, and the village was quiet. I could hear the river flowing in the distance. I took a deep breath and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It wasn't loud or exciting. It was calm and deep, like a soft light inside me. I realized I hadn't felt that kind of peace since I was a child. I thought of my younger self, the girl who used to dream of changing the world before she got lost in success and expectations. I felt as if I had finally met her again. As months went by, I began writing in a small journal every night. I wrote about my days, the children, the sky, and my thoughts. It helped me see things more clearly. One night, I wrote that happiness wasn't something to chase. It was something to notice. That simple idea changed everything for me. I stopped waiting for big moments and started appreciating the small ones. A smile from Tara, the smell of rain on dry soil, the warmth of a cup of tea. However, peace is never simple. The same silence that made me feel alive sometimes made me feel lonely. There were nights when I missed the noise of the city. I missed the sound of friends laughing in restaurants, the lights, the smell of coffee shops, and even the endless movement. There were evenings when I looked at the stars and asked myself if I had made a mistake. I didn't have answers, but I was learning that it was okay not to have them. In my 3rd month there, something unexpected happened. I got sick with a fever that lasted several days. The other teachers took care of me. They brought food and checked on me each morning. Their kindness touched me deeply. I had been alone for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. When I finally recovered, I sat outside with Mina and watched the children play. I told her how grateful I was. She smiled and said, "When you care for others, you find yourself." Her words stayed in my heart. By the time I had been there for half a year, I felt like a different person. My skin was darker from the sun, my hair messy from the wind, and my hands rough from work. But I didn't care. I was stronger, calmer, and more honest with myself. Sometimes I thought about Daniel and my old life, but it felt like thinking about a story that had ended long ago. I no longer wanted that version of happiness. When the school term ended, the children brought me flowers and small gifts. Tara gave me a paper heart with my name written inside it. I promised them I would come back next year. As I packed my bag, I realized that leaving this place would not be easy. I was afraid that the city might steal the peace I had found here. But I also knew that the lessons I had learned would stay with me wherever I went. The day before I left, Mina gave me a small clay bowl. She told me it was made by her grandmother and that I should keep it as a reminder. "Don't forget what you found here," she said. I held the bowl carefully in my hands. It was simple, with small cracks, but beautiful in its own way. It reminded me of myself. That night, I didn't sleep much. I listened to the river and the quiet voices of people outside. I felt both sad and grateful. I had come here searching for meaning, and even though I still didn't know all the answers, I had found something far more important. I had found a way to live. As the sun rose the next morning, I looked at the mountains one last time. The air was cold and clean. I whispered goodbye and walked toward the small bus that would take me down to the city. I carried only my backpack and the clay bowl. Everything else I had left behind. The road stretched in front of me, long and bright in the morning light. I didn't know where it would lead next, but I knew it had already changed me forever. When I returned to London, it felt like stepping into another life. The streets were crowded again, full of people rushing in all directions. The air was heavy with smoke and noise. My body was here, but my heart was still in the mountains. I carried the small clay bowl in my bag, wrapped in a scarf. It was the only thing that reminded me I had truly lived somewhere else. I went back to my apartment, which had been empty for almost a year. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The clean white walls, the modern furniture, and the cold light coming through the window. I stood in the middle of the room and felt nothing. It was strange to be home and not feel at home at all. I made a cup of tea and sat on the floor. I listened to the sounds outside, cars and people, and I realized how loud everything was. The next morning, I opened my laptop to check the hundreds of unread emails. Most were from work, a few from friends, and one from Daniel. I didn't open his message. I didn't need to. I could already imagine his words, full of questions and confusion. But I didn't owe him any explanations. I had already explained everything the night I left. Now, it was time to live differently, even if the world around me didn't understand how. Finding a job again was not difficult. I had experience, and my old company welcomed me back quickly. They offered me a higher position, more responsibility, and more money. For a moment, I felt proud, but the feeling didn't last. On my first day back in the office, I sat in front of my computer, staring at the endless emails and meetings on my calendar. Everyone spoke about targets and deadlines as if they were the most important things in the world. I smiled and tried to fit in, but inside I felt like a stranger. During lunch breaks, I often walked outside to find quiet corners. Sometimes I sat in a small park behind the building. I watched children playing, listened to the sound of wind in the trees, and thought about the mountains. I missed the slow rhythm of life, the smell of smoke in the mornings, and the laughter of the children at the school. I missed the sound of the river at night. I told myself I had to adjust, but it was not easy. One evening, my manager asked me to stay late for a meeting. It was already dark outside, and everyone looked tired. I watched my colleagues and realized they were all chasing something they didn't understand. They were like I had once been, always running, always busy, always afraid to stop. I sat there quietly, wondering what I was doing there. When I finally left the office, I walked home through the cold streets and felt something inside me whisper again. It told me that I couldn't live like this forever. A few days later, I met my old friend Sarah for coffee. She was happy to see me and wanted to hear everything about India. I told her about the children, the school, and the peace I had found. She listened, but I could see confusion in her eyes. She asked if I missed my old life and if I would ever go back to it completely. I told her I wasn't sure. When she left, I sat there for a long time, thinking about how different we had become. I realized that sometimes you lose people not because of distance, but because you have changed. Weeks turned into months. I tried to live simply, but city life had its own pull. I still worked, but I stopped chasing promotions. I saved money, cooked my own food, and avoided expensive restaurants. I started volunteering on weekends, teaching English to immigrant families. It reminded me of my students in the village. Their gratitude filled the same quiet space inside me that I had found in India. Sometimes, on Sundays, I visited small art markets along the river. I loved walking among the people selling handmade things. It felt real, human, and imperfect. One afternoon, I saw a man selling small clay bowls, each one different. I stopped and picked one up. It was smooth and light, and when I looked at it, I smiled. The seller asked if I wanted to buy it, but I said no. I told him I already had one that meant the world to me. That night, I took out Mina's clay bowl and placed it on my desk. It had a small crack on the side, but it was beautiful. I touched it gently and thought about the people I had left behind. I wondered if the children still remembered me, if Tara was still writing her poems, if Mina was still teaching by the fire. I realized that even if I never went back, that place would always live inside me. Months later, I received an email from the school. They said they were starting a new term and needed more teachers. My heart jumped as I read it. They didn't ask me to come, but they wrote that I would always be welcome. I closed my laptop and sat in silence. I could almost hear the voices of the children and the sound of the river. For the first time since I had returned, I felt truly awake. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, thinking about my life. I thought about what success meant and what peace truly felt like. I realized that peace is not a place. It is a way of seeing the world. It is something you carry inside you, even when life around you is noisy and fast. India had taught me that. The mountains had taught me that. Mina and Tara had taught me that. A few weeks later, I took some time off work and traveled to the countryside of England. I stayed in a small village near the sea. I wanted to feel the quiet again. The air was fresh, and the sky was open. I walked by the cliffs every morning and listened to the waves crash below. I began to write again in my journal, something I hadn't done since leaving India. I wrote about the difference between living and existing. I wrote that I never wanted to forget the lessons of that road that had changed me. One morning, while walking along the beach, I met an old woman collecting shells. She told me she came there every day to find the most beautiful ones. She said that each shell carried a story of the sea. I helped her for a while, and she gave me a small white shell as a gift. When I looked at it, I thought of the clay bowl. Both were small, imperfect, and full of meaning. When I returned to London again, I felt lighter. I kept the shell next to the bowl on my desk. They were both reminders of what mattered most. Life had not become easier, but it had become clearer. I no longer wanted to escape the world. I wanted to live in it differently. As time passed, I stopped thinking about what I had lost and started focusing on what I had found. I had found stillness. I had found gratitude. I had found the ability to listen, not just to others, but to myself. The world outside was still noisy, full of people rushing to places they didn't love. But I no longer felt part of that race. Sometimes people asked me why I had gone to India or what I had been searching for. I usually smiled and said I was looking for peace, but the truth was deeper. I had gone there to find myself, and in doing so, I discovered that meaning isn't something you find. It's something you build each day through kindness, honesty, and quiet choices. 1 year later, I finally returned to the village for a visit. When I arrived, everything looked smaller but still full of life. The children ran toward me, their laughter filling the air. Mina hugged me and said, "I told you the mountains would call you back." I smiled because she was right. I was home again, but this time I understood what home truly meant. That night, I sat by the fire with the teachers, listening to their stories. The stars were bright above us, and the air smelled of wood and dust. I felt grateful. The road that had once taken me away from everything I knew had brought me back to what mattered. It had taught me how to live slowly, how to see beauty in small things, and how to listen to silence. As I went to sleep that night, I looked at the clay bowl on the table beside me. Its small crack shone in the firelight. It was not perfect, but it was real, just like me. I smiled and closed my eyes, knowing that no matter where I went next, I would never lose this peace again. The road had done its work. It had changed me forever. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.